Welcome to the Business of Story. Today's episode is sponsored by Wix e-commerce, the professional platform that enables entrepreneurs just like you from all over the world to create and run your own online store and grow your e-commerce business. Hi, I'm Park Howell, and I am so glad you are with us today. Do you remember this bit from 21 Jump Street?
The department was forced to drop the charges because you forgot to read him his Miranda Rights. What possible reason is there for not doing the only thing you have to do when arresting someone?
I did read him his right. I did a version of that.
Do you even know the Miranda Rights?
Yes.
Let's hear them then.
You got a lot of stuff to do.
Go ahead. You going anywhere, Schmidt? We got time.
I had a thing, but I can probably push it back.
Go ahead. It's 4 declamatory sentences followed by a question for a total of 57 words.
Okay. It obviously starts with you have the right to remain silent. I know you've heard this before. And then, I think it sounds something like, well, the thing, you have the right to remain an attorney.
Did you say that you have the right to be an attorney?
You do have the right to be an attorney if you want to.
As evidenced here, the last place you want to be confused or confusing is with your legal matters. The stakes are far too high for low-level, non-narrative communications. But it doesn't matter if you're in a courtroom, boardroom, break room, or living room. When you complicate, you obfuscate. When you confuse, you lose.
It's just a narrative framework. I think it's why there's a business version of the book and why there's going to be a politics version of the book, why we have historians who use this. It's just the way to communicate. And lawyers have always known that they need to communicate in narrative no matter what area of practice, even if they're not in court. You know, a lot of lawyers don't go to court. They're transactional lawyers, so they may do contracts or whatever the case may be. They have to solve a problem and communicate persuasively.
Doug Passan is a lawyer, filmmaker, writer, and musician. He has been practicing criminal defense for 25 years. He is also an award-winning documentary filmmaker who combines his passion for filmmaking and storytelling with his practice of law by producing short documentaries for use as mitigation at criminal sentencing and post-conviction proceedings. He is an internationally recognized expert in the field of sentencing advocacy and described by the Wall Street Journal as a pioneer in the emerging field of sentencing mitigation videos. Even Lisa Simpson took note of Doug's work to get Homer off a grand theft auto charge. Doug has also co-authored with Dr. Randy Olson the third book in a growing series called The Narrative Gym for Law. Now, as you know, I wrote The Narrative Gym for Business with Randy, publishing it in September of 2021, based on Randy's initial version called The Narrative Gym, which is focused on using the ABT in science and academic communications. Well, as you'll hear in today's show, if you want to win an argument, especially when the odds are stacked against you, the foundational narrative framework of the ABT will focus your message, hook your audience, and help them buy into the world the way you see it. So please welcome to the Business of Story, Doug Passan. Doug, welcome back to the show.
It's good to be here, Park. Thanks for having me.
You know, you and I met a couple years ago. You were on show number 182, entitled How Defense Attorneys Use Cinematic Storytelling to Reduce Sentences. And it was a fascinating show. A friend of mine introduced me to you and your work. And about that same time, the New York Times had come out and covered your work, and kind of in a disparaging tone, if you will, the fact that you were using storytelling as a defense attorney to help mitigate sentences for people. How did you get into that storytelling world in the first place?
Well, all my life, there was only a couple of things that I ever saw myself being or doing. One was lawyer, the other was filmmaker. believe it or not. And I was making movies in high school. This is back before we even had digital video. So, two VCRs strung together to edit. And I don't know what it was about movies, but being in a theater and that space and being totally transported through story, it was my refuge. It was like one of my favorite places to be in the whole world. And so, it was more of just a love affair with movies throughout my young life. And then when I was getting through college and I was deciding what was next, it was either going to be law school or film school. And of course, I picked law school, but the film stuff never left me. And I really parallel tracks to learning the law. I was reading books on story and screenwriting and story structure and Campbell and the hero's journey. And really, really, really soon into my legal journey, I figured out that those two were going to intersect in a very powerful way, because that's really all we're doing. We get a case, we have a problem to solve, and the way we do it is by telling a story. So that was the two became a totally natural fit for me. At some point, I got into documentary filmmaking, and then at some point, I started making these short documentaries for my cases.
And we're going to get back to that in a minute, because it's pretty fascinating, the work you've done, and especially sentence mitigation videos. But you have just come out with a new book with our mutual good friend, Dr. Randy Olson, The Narrative Gem for Law. And I don't know, I think through my work, maybe I introduced you to Randy and the ABT. And as you know, we came out with The Narrative Gem for Business on the heels of Randy's book, The Narrative Gem, which was pretty much written for the science community and academia. Anyway, I've been going through your book. I absolutely love it because it's given me a whole bunch of new examples that I can use to demonstrate the ABT in action.
Nice.
As a persuasive tool. And I can't imagine a tougher audience than a judge or a jury that you are trying to see your side of the story as you are defending someone, someone who people suggest have broken the law, and in some cases have broken the law, but maybe don't require the sentence that is going to be handed down. Again, we'll get back to that in a moment.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk about the ABT in lawyer, attorney, storytelling, and how you have found it so powerful. And beginning with that fun clip we had up top with the 21 Jump Street that you shared with me, and how the whole Miranda Rights things falls into this.
Yeah. So, well, before we get there, I have to, you're modest, but I have to give you more props than you're giving yourself, because I'm a Malcolm Gladwell fan, and he would call you, Park Howell, a connector. You have this power of not only connecting the dots between various disciplines, but connecting people. So I regularly listen to your podcast, and you've had Randy Olson on a few times. And when I heard him talk about the ABT, the light went on. And I maybe it was because I've been swimming in these waters for so long and been looking so long for a really concrete, dare I say, simple way to express story structure. I was totally blown away. So I got the Narrative Gem, which was the original thing. And then when I saw you came out with the business version, I decided I was going to make it my mission to stalk Randy through you and convince him to co-author the law version with me. And it wasn't really a hard sell, but I was so grateful that you connected me and that he agreed to do it. We're just rolling it out, but I think it's going to be a game changer for my legal community, for my colleagues. So what was the question? I forgot.
Yeah, and I'll say, when I was writing the Narrative Gem for Business with Randy, it also, through our conversations and prepping for that, brought up other instances of using the ABT in business, as it did for you guys in the ABT, the Narrative Gem for Law, because you both then came to the realization, I think, through your prodding, that the Miranda Rights is written as an and, which is non-narrative, and maybe be one of the reasons why it gets ignored by people to their detriment because they say things without an attorney in the room that they should not be saying, and it is indeed held against them in the court of law.
Yep.
So that's why we started the show
Yep.
with that bit from 21 Jump Street. Let's jump into that.
So we were thinking about examples in the legal world, and that hit us kind of like a lightning bolt. And I think what really sparked the idea is how the ABT is about the problem solution dynamic, solving problems. And I was thinking about what's one of the biggest problems I face in my job as a criminal defense lawyer. And that is, even though we have Miranda, and even though the police are obligated to inform people that they have a right not to talk, they always talk. They always talk every single time. And they're probably, it's not as simplistic as one reason, but I believe that when you, and it hit me, what is Miranda? Miranda is non-narrative. So if you talk about narrative being persuasive, then the obvious corollary is non-narrative is unpersuasive, right? And it's all and material. And if you look at the Miranda rights, we thought, first of all, it's a perfect example because everybody knows them, not lawyers and non-lawyers. So it was just a great frame of reference. But think about Miranda. You have the right to remain silent, and you have the right to a lawyer, and if you choose to speak to police, those can be used against you. And, if you can't afford a lawyer, one will be appointed you. And, period. And we know that when we speak just in non-narrative, which is the and land, if you will, it tends to go in one ear and out the other. And I think that's exactly what's happening. So we posit this scenario. What if police, I mean, it's a whole nother discussion whether this is intentional or not, Park, because let's face it, police, as important as they are and as good as most of them they are, they're not really in the business of convincing you not to talk to them, right? They want you to talk to them, right?
They're not exactly on your side.
Well, yeah. So, if you invoke Miranda, it makes their job more difficult because a lot of times it's your words that are used to make the case. And believe it or not, the studies show that people even falsely confess, right? And we'll talk, I think we could talk more about that in a second because the way that police officers, a technique that they use is deep into the world of narrative to get you to do that, but I'm jumping ahead. But anyway, in the book, we posit what if the police did the Miranda rights in ABT form? How would that go? Because it's certainly more persuasive, and it's you have the right to remain silent and the right to a lawyer, but if you choose to speak to the police, anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Therefore, you shouldn't speak to law enforcement without first talking to a lawyer.
And you think that would make a huge difference out there?
I think it would. I think it would make a huge difference. Now, I don't think that's going to happen in the distant future or ever. But here's my ABT about why it should happen. You ready? Americans value the Constitution and the many rights and protections it affords us. And the Supreme Court continued this tradition by mandating that police have to inform a suspect of their Miranda rights before trying to interrogate them about an alleged crime. But because law enforcement officers communicate these crucial rights in non-narrative form, citizens routinely give up their rights without fully understanding the consequences. Therefore, if the goal is to truly better protect a citizen's constitutional rights, law enforcement should change the form in which they deliver this message. What do you think?
And that form should be an and, but, and therefore.
Exactly,
ABT, right?
Exactly. 100%.
Power to the people, Doug. Power to the people.
100%.
So, the Miranda rights came out of Arizona back in the 60s, and it was really popularized if you weren't getting arrested by Joe Friday on Dragnet. He was always reading the Miranda rights. I went to try to find a clip of him doing that. I couldn't find him actually reading the Miranda rights, but I love this clip. Even though the perp is a real, weirdo, listen to how they present the fact that he didn't understand his Miranda rights. Joe Friday.
They advised you of your constitutional rights before you opened your mouth. Now you're trying to tell us you didn't understand. Well, you're a liar. You understood what your rights were then, just as you understand now. Somewhere in the last 40 hours, while you were rattling around in the bucket, you got the word. You know that 62 Cal 2nd 338 states that you'll be advised of your right to remain silent, and that you must thoroughly understand and waive that right, because if you don't, any confession you make is inadmissible as testimony in a court of law. 40 hours ago, you confessed what you did to that little girl. That was the truth. Now you sit here and tell us that you didn't understand your rights. That's a lie. Like every hoodlum since Cain up through Capone, you've learned to hide behind some quirk in the law.
All right, coming back in with you, and I'm going to just ask you to respond to that, Doug.
Joe Friday's a maniac. So first of all, did you notice how he described the Miranda rights? He called them a quirk in the law. That criminals just exploit this little legal loophole. And I know that the general public probably shares Joe Friday's sentiments, but I always find it interesting because especially today in today's political climate, people are talk a mean game about the Constitution and the letter of the Constitution and the rights of the Constitution, especially when we talk about the Second Amendment, right? So why is not the Fifth Amendment, which is where the right to remain silent is enshrined, carry the same amount of weight? And why is that viewed as a quirk in the law when it comes to protecting somebody who's accused of a crime's rights? For me, I mean, fine, I'm a defense lawyer, so of course I'm going to think this way, but it doesn't really add up. And like I said before, this situation where a person is accused of a crime, keep in mind, they're not guilty. Every single person who sits in that chair, who's being interrogated by a law enforcement officer under our Constitution, is presumed innocent, which means they are not guilty of any crime. And they remain not guilty of any crime until they are convicted of a crime or plead guilty way down the road. So don't you think it's a good thing that our Constitution says we need to protect everyone sitting in that chair, because guess what? Some of them may not be guilty. And they're kind of at the mercy of this interrogation of law enforcement when it happens. I mean, you're locked in a room. It's intimidating. It's scary. You don't know your rights and you don't know what to do. Why wouldn't you just have a lawyer to give you some advice there?
So let's jump in the Wayback Machine just a little bit, Doug, and I'm talking about going back a few years here. So you were a successful defense attorney, and you found the power of story to be able to really have a major impact in these sentencing and mitigating the sentencing through the videos you would tell in these stories. But as you know, storytelling is difficult. It's complex. It's complicated. Therefore, a lot of people, whether you are in the courtroom or the boardroom, will default back to and. Let's just go back and talk a little bit about these sentencing videos and how you applied the hero's journey to them. And I'd like you to take us to a moment just recently where you helped a fairly prominent defender, or not a defender, what would I say? A fairly prominent
defendant. He was a defendant.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Defendants mitigate their sentencing. So how did you start with this, and tell us how it works?
How did I start with sentencing videos? It was really motivated by an idea that storytelling was already on the front burner. I think I sort of knew that my job was to tell stories. And by the way, defense lawyers get really stuck in the and land. The rookie mistake when they're advocating for a client at sentencing is to just do this parade of sort of pity points. I call them sympathy points. My client is homeless and he's addicted and his dad was mean to him and, he has mental illness and, right? And the question is, so what? Tell me a story, because if you just throw that all out there, we talk about Shirley's Law in these books, which is if you don't control the narrative, you don't tell a story, someone's going to take all that and material and make their own story out of it. You're not going to like it very much. So lawyers throw those all out there hoping to get sympathy, and that never works. You tell a story, you help the judge walk a mile in your client's shoes, then you get empathy, and that's how it works. So that was always my goal, was empathy-based communication and empathy-based representation. The only way to do that is through narrative. And then there were certain cases where I said, we lawyers, we love to talk so much. We talk and we write in our pleadings, but some stories are better shown. and not told. And that is when I started doing these videos. And the first one I did, and I think I talked about it on the last time I was on the show, but it was a rehabilitation where a person was addicted to methamphetamine and he rehabilitated himself. And I just wanted to see the before pictures of the gaunt, ragged, just addicted skeleton of a former person that he was, and then the new man he had become because he completely transformed his life. And so I started doing the videos when I had a really good visual story to tell. And so that's that, and then our system, Park, I don't know if people know this, but it's very dehumanizing in the sense that you rarely see the human being behind the crime. And everybody says, well, let the punishment fit the crime. And I say, no, let the punishment fit the person. And the law says, let the punishment fit the person. We say we don't judge a person by their worst mistake. We're going to judge them by the totality of their lives, choices and accomplishments and triumphs and tragedies, right? And so the way you do that is you take them on the journey and tell the story. And that, bringing up to this case you're talking about now, lawyers bring me in from all over, the country to do storytelling and videos in their cases. And I was lucky enough to represent a young man named Ty Garbin, who I'm sure your listeners heard of. He was the first defendant to be sentenced for the plot to kidnap Governor Whitmer in Michigan. And it was during the pandemic, and there was a lot of crazy plans that were in place about putting her on trial and sentencing her and doing it on live stream. And it was a pretty disturbing, rightly disturbing set of facts. And, a lot of people said that's horrible and he should be put in prison for the rest of his life. Well, you sit down in the same room and you start to hear the story, and it's a young kid who's never been in trouble a day in his life, who everybody describes as like the boy next door and helpful and loving and kind and smart. And he was a hard worker. And then the story becomes, well, how does someone like that get sucked into this rabbit hole of crazy and end up in a plot like this? And it became a story about radicalization, much in the same way we talk about how young kids, for example, get radicalized through Islamic extremism and that sort of thing. And so it became a story where there was a lot of psychiatric professionals and social workers and people with a lot of expertise about how someone could be vulnerable to this kind of rhetoric and getting drawn into stuff that they would never ordinarily find themselves being drawn into. And then the question is, okay, so that was part of the story, but then my favorite stories are the redemption aspect, which is, what have they done to make it right? And there was a very powerful story about what Ty had done to A, come out of this fog, B, realize how wrong and detrimental it was, and then C, devote his current and future existence to helping others not fall into the same trap that he did. And so by the time it got to sentencing, the tone and tenor had shifted so dramatically. I listened in on the sentencing because I'm in Arizona and that was in Michigan. But you just listened to it and it was like the judge was talking to his own son at that point. And he deeply understood. He's not condoning it. I mean, he still gave the kid 6 years, but he could have gotten at least twice as much. He wasn't condoning it, but he felt like there was a level of understanding that came through telling his story that would have never otherwise been the case.
Did you have one central narrative theme using the Dobzhansky template that you used in positioning and telling that story?
Yeah, I think it probably would have been nothing in that case would make sense except in the light of radicalization. That would have probably now I did that right on the front end of my journey with the ABT and Dobzhansky, so I'm not sure if I'd actually formulated that, but going back in time, that probably would have been it, because everything was built around that idea of how normal, honest, sweet kid gets sucked into this madness.
Well, it's a really good example of the power story. And of course, a lot of people will push back on you and say, hey, these guys and gals deserve what they did, Doug. You were using story as a manipulative, emotional device just to get them to see him on in a different light.
Well, yeah, people say that all the time. And that was really this big spin of the New York Times piece. And that, let's face it, that's the basic stereotype of a criminal defense lawyer. Exploit loopholes and say whatever it takes to get somebody off. It doesn't work like that in the real world. In the real world, you're in front of, typically for sentencing, judges who have seen it, heard it all. They have a very keen sense of when they're being snowed or conned, right? And so I am trying to, I don't know if you want to use the word manipulate, that's fine. It's got such a negative connotation, but I'm trying to move you. I'm trying to make you feel something. I'm trying to make you see the human being behind the charge. If that's called manipulation, okay, that's fine. My guess is that any of your listeners who find themselves on the wrong end of a criminal case or have a son or a daughter who finds themselves charged would want the judge to see that son or daughter for the person that they are and the life they lived. In my system, in the federal system, very often the first time a judge ever lays eyes physically in the same room with a person is the day they're going to get sentenced. So all the way up to that point, they're just a stack of paper in a file. Nothing good can come of that if you're talking about humanizing and storytelling, right? So our job is to turn that upside down and just take control of the story that's been told about them since the very moment they got arrested.
And you're having an impact when not only the New York Times take notice, but who else?
Is this where we get to talk about the Simpsons?
The Simpsons.
Oh my goodness. Do we have time for this story? Because it's
Go
all
for
right.
it.
So
Absolutely.
it's my all-time favorite show. I'm 51. What I had to think about. I'm 51. I was 18, I think, when The Simpsons came out, and I was hooked from. They had me at hello. So it's been my all-time favorite show for most of my life. Imagine this scenario when I'm sitting in my kitchen. It's maybe 2 years now. And I'm watching, it's like season 30, so it's 30 years into this. And I'm watching this episode, Homer gets arrested for joyriding in Comic Book Guy's car. And Lisa's Googling and she says, hey, there's this thing called sentencing mitigation videos that lawyers use to humanize their...
Your car, sir.
You see that, kids? It's the kind of car they don't make anymore. Always wanted.
You stole my car. My precious Easter Brody knob. They're gonna charge you with grand theft auto.
By the way, you're under arrest.
Doesn't the law say I need a helmet too?
Another law you're breaking.
I find the defendant guilty.
Your Honor, I'm not the one on trial here. 2 weeks. 2 weeks to turn this around. Lisa, can we get the state to change its sentencing guide?
Sentencing mitigation videos. People have had their jail terms reduced or even gotten off death.
Okay, Homer Simpson. Well, real family man. Yeah, always brings his kids into the bar.
Rehired so many times. Homer Simpson has 2 children enrolled in our school. That's all I'm comfortable.
It's a grace to the family. He is an 8-ball father. I warned Marge. Marry him.
Sorry, Snowball. Cats are polarizing.
He's incredibly generous to his friends and neighbors.
I am impressed, so unless the prosecution has a rebuttal, I'm inclined to...
Not so fast.
Are you saying I'm off the hook?
Yes, in fact, you may be surprised, but you are now my best friend.
I almost fell off my chair, like literally almost passed out. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And the best was Mr. Burns. They did the whole so it's a mix of terror and ecstasy to see your favorite show lampooning your life's work. But let's face it, it's The Simpsons. That's what they do. They make fun of everything. So they had Guillermo del Toro doing Mr. Burns's sentencing video. But again, it's that whole trope about,
That's great.
well, this is for rich people to get off, to use trickery to get off. What people don't realize is, when I started doing these, I was a public defender. This whole thing was born and raised in the indigent defense system. So people without resources get these videos perhaps more often than people with resources. I digress. Anyway, there aren't more than a handful of people in this lifetime that do this work. And I set out on a mission to see how they knew about this, because in my narcissistic fantasy, it's because of me. And so I actually did get in touch finally with someone at the show and sent them this gushing fanboy email, and did not expect to hear any response except maybe a knock at the door to serve the restraining order. But the email came back, said, yeah, we saw this article about you and the work that you did. So you can definitely say you helped inspire this episode. And then the next line was, by the way, if you're ever in LA, we'd love to have you join us for a table read with the cast, which is where they sit around and read the script. And I was like, oh my goodness, if I'm ever in LA, how's tomorrow? So took my whole family. I have 2 sons. And they don't think anything I do is cool ever, but sitting around in a small conference table with the cast of The Simpsons while they read a script, that they thought was cool. And I kind of feel like there's nothing in my life I could ever do that will be more of a crowning achievement than that.
Well, you know what Joseph Campbell said on The Hero's Journey. When you follow your bliss, Doug, doors will only open where there were walls before. And there you were, found in your bliss, sitting in a Simpsons table read. That is hysterical.
Pretty cool.
I need to take a quick break here for our wonderful sponsor, Wix. And when we come back, Doug, we're going to dive more into the ABT.
Great.
Because you've gone from the complex into the simple, and we've talked about defense attorneys, but the big question is, can any attorney use storytelling in the ABT, and how? Let's cover that right after this. If you want to sell online, you got to stand out. So go to Wix e-commerce and create an online store that will absolutely grab your shopper's attention. You can build a state-of-the-art storefront, showcase your product with striking product pages, and even sell subscriptions. With Wix e-commerce, you can go global and display prices in local currencies. You can even boost your sales by offering instant coupons using the live chat. Now you can streamline your checkout process with automated shipping fees and sales tax calculation. You can even manage your inventory and track your sales from one convenient dashboard while you analyze your comprehensive sales and traffic reports. So check out these and more must-have e-commerce features for sellers just like you who absolutely mean business. Go to Wix.com/e-commerce today and join over 700,000 active stores selling worldwide with Wix e-commerce. Folks, we're talking with Doug Passan, a world-famous, Simpson-famous defense attorney who has used storytelling to great effect and has just recently launched a new book with our good friend Dr. Randy Olson called The Narrative Gym for Law. Narrative Gym for Law, introducing the ABT Framework for Persuasive Advocacy. And so I want to jump off on that. Now, the question leading into this is, you use it great with defense work, but can anybody use it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a narrative framework. I think it's why there's a business version of the book, and why there's going to be a politics version of the book, why we have historians who use this. It's just the way to communicate. And lawyers have always known that they need to communicate in narrative, no matter what area of practice, even if they're not in court. A lot of lawyers don't go to court. They're transactional lawyers, so they may do contracts or, whatever the case may be, they have to solve a problem and communicate persuasively. And so one of the things that we talk about in the book is this problem solution dynamic. So before we even get to structuring the A and the B and the T, I love to just focus on the Dobzhansky, which is, what is the one thing in your case that everything else revolves around? Because we're on information overload, so our brains are going everywhere and anywhere, and we're also sort of meticulous. We tend to be sometimes, some of us, obsessive meticulous, and we want to make sure we hit every single point in every single way. And it ends up just being a mishmash of information that is completely lost. So the first thing we do is just focus in. And every single lawyer, no matter what, it could be a personal injury lawyer. It could be I'm trying to think. There's, any number of lawyers. There's just no limit.
In Arizona, I think of real estate attorneys. I can't tell you, I can't swing a cat around my head without running into a real estate commercial developer or attorney. But I mean, you can use that in anything.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're writing a positioning paper, if you have to litigate something, or if you're just simply putting a contract together to try to get the other side to see it your way.
And we were trying to find a sort of just a very easy example for the book. And we actually came up with a real estate problem in the ABT build that we did, which is a woman who's being evicted. And, what is the main problem and how do you solve it? And we decided we were going to solve it by invoking this doctrine of adverse possession. But this idea of figuring out what is the main problem, which in the ABT build is the but, and starting with the but and focusing everything around that, that's every single lawyer ever in the history of lawyers. Because what are lawyers for but to solve their clients' problems? Every single client, even a real estate lawyer, the client may have $1 bazillion in a great real estate portfolio, but every single transaction has a challenge around it that they're trying to overcome. Even if it's as simple as, I want to get this piece of property for the lowest price possible. That's a goal, and it's a problem, and it's what you're there to solve.
Since I have you as a defense advocate here, one of the greatest defenses ever pulled off was that of O.J. Simpson, and you can boil that down to an ABT, can't you? Absolutely.
And we did the example in the book, and I would love to be able to read it, but I don't have that in front of me. But and the book is. It's a 30,000 foot view, which is there was a lot of evidence that OJ did it, but the defense team knew the power of narrative and invoked it. Therefore, OJ got a not guilty. But if I was going to be the defense lawyer Monday morning quarterbacking that, the ABT would have been something like what Johnny Cochran did, which is we want our police to be honest and to follow the rules. But in this case, there was evidence of evidence tampering, racism, institutional bias, you name it. And therefore, even though there was what they say is a mountain of evidence, you can't trust it because of this corruption of these other aspects of the case. So that's not a great ABT build on the spot, but that's one of the things about ABT. You got to work it.
Work through
but,
it.
When you talk about the Job Jansky, that was the one thing when we talk about, and we also talk about the power of moments. So look at this famous quote by Johnny Cochran that we can all still recite 25 years later, which is, you tell me, go ahead.
If it don't fit, you got to
Exactly.
quit.
See, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And that is the one thing. There were the evidence, it didn't fit. And of course, they're referring to the glove, right, that didn't fit. But that was about, well, then that glove was not OJ's. Therefore, that glove must have been planted. Therefore, there's corruption in the evidence, right? And so they knew these folks were very, very good. And this is maybe a case of out lawyering, that the better lawyers just won the day. But how do they do that? They do it through narrative. That's how they do it.
Yeah, I mean, you take that whole line down, you could really boil it. If this glove fits, he did it. But it doesn't fit, therefore you have to acquit. I mean, I know it sounds so basic and so many people, and I would imagine you see it in your world too, with really smart brainiac attorneys thinking, this is too simple, it can't possibly work, or thanks, Doug, you just rolled it out to me, I got it, I'll take it from here. Mm-hmm. What has been your experience with that?
Well, I think it's intuitive because, I went back and forth with Randy about this word because we call it simple. We call the ABT simple, and it's elegant in its simplicity, and it really is, but it really isn't. because it's simple on the surface, but it's complex, once you try to refine it and build it out and make it better. It's never going to be perfect. I don't think. At some point you have to say, okay, it's good enough, we're done. But I think because it is such a simple concept, A, B, and T, people go right away and go, okay, I got it. There's some ands and here's some buts and here's a therefore, I got it. But it's never, even for people who've been doing it for a while, you leave it for a day and you come back to it and you look at it and go, that's not right. We got to keep going. We got to keep going and keep going. And then it'll get there.
Yeah, until you find that one focused narrative. That's what I see in business so often is we start and we'll have 2 or 3 different narratives going on because our and what the ABT does is it makes you really focus down. But here's the problem, and that becomes your focused narrative. And then you go back and you set up that problem. I want this, and it's important because of this, but I don't have it because of this. Therefore, I'm going to help you get it.
Right.
Due to this.
And that's it. It's so funny because I've been getting feedback on the book, and I have other colleagues that work with lawyers in various ways. And they said, that's what happens. You'd be so surprised if you get a group of like a team together who's working on a case and you ask them, what is the one thing here? Or what is the main problem? Or what is the story you need to tell? And you'll get 6 different answers. Nobody's even on the same page to start with. And so this whole process is first and foremost one of focusing you in on that one thing. So that's why I love the Dobzhansky so much. I like to call, we have Shirley's Law in the book. I like to call the Dobzhansky. It hasn't caught on yet, but I call it Curly's Law because of the movie City Slickers. Do you remember Jack Palance's character? Oh, yeah. And he tells you the secret to life, and he holds up the glove and it's that one thing. And if you find that, everything else is going to fall right into place. And that's what we're talking about here.
Well, in branding, and I imagine you do the exact same exercise if you have a bunch of attorneys sitting around the room and you're trying to figure out what that one thing is. I do the same thing with marketers. Get around the room and say, all right, every one of you, give me your ABT of what you think this brand narrative is. What is that one problem that we're solving for here? And you're absolutely right. You'll get 6 different narratives, and our job is to bring that together in the branding world, the sales world, to get that one focus and help them find their language. Same thing is true in the boardroom of a law firm, right? If you're sitting around, say, everyone pull out a piece of paper. You know the facts, you know the content of this case. You write down an ABT as to what it's about, and let's see if we can't find our singular narrative that we can all work from when we go into that room, courtroom, or in that contract negotiation.
Yeah. And you know what? The one thing I've found people, as I'm getting feedback about the whole process and the build, well, one of the big challenges is the and material, actually, because you're supposed to keep the and material as agreement, right? So you're supposed to keep it in the ordinary world, and you're supposed to keep sort of a calm, peaceful place, right? But there's a tendency to want to kind of pollute that right up front with contradiction, or even things that may be agreeable but just evoke a lot of negativity. Like I started out saying, yes, my client did it and he's sorry for it, but and you look at that and you're like, well, you're starting off really in a kind of a dark place. And the idea of the and material is to draw people in and connect people with you. And that's hard. I mean, it's very difficult. It can be.
It's aspirational in some respects, and you're trying to validate the position of the person sitting across from you and getting them nodding in agreement, even a little bit. Just said, okay, yeah, we're starting off from the same place. I can agree with that. But then here's the mitigating circumstances, but here's the problem, the controversy that we're solving for, and here's how we go about it. Doug, besides being in the courtroom, I mean, how do you use the ABT in other aspects of your communication, be it emailing, be it in front of the media? How else can you use this framework?
Yeah. Well, I should probably do it better on these podcasts because now I'm doing podcasts to promote the book. But don't use this as a perfect example. But no, email is the first and foremost, because I don't talk to the press that much. I don't have those kinds of cases that often. But if and when I do, I will absolutely 100% prepare some very good ABTs and have them in my pocket ready to go, because those types of communications require sound bites, right? The press, you got to control that narrative. If you just ramble on, they're going to take any piece they want and tell any story they want. But emails first and foremost, because people are so sick of emails, and the younger crowd, they don't even touch email anymore. It's all texts and stuff. It's because it's so much junk. There's so much junk littering in your email. We still communicate a lot through email. I want to make sure that I'm short, to the point, and persuasive. So I'm trying really hard to even simple emails to try to do them in ABT form. I'm dabbling in social media these days, and I think that's a really good place to try your ABTs, especially if you're on Twitter, which I'm not really on Twitter so much, but you have limit to the amount of characters you can have. ABT's perfect for that. In fact, I think was it in your book or you on your podcast that you said somebody in your world did try it in ABT and their response went through the roof?
Christopher Lockett, legendary Silicon Valley marketer, known for category design, brand category design. I was on his show, and I introduced him about 6 months ago to the ABT, and he's like, "Whoa, that's pretty cool. Does it really work?" And I said, "Try it on a tweet." And the next day, he sent me a screenshot of a tweet where he used it for the very first time, and in under 12 hours, he had over, I think it was 69,000 interactions with that tweet. And he's like, "Dude, I don't know what's in this formula, but I have never had that kind of impact." And this is a guy that knows communication. So yes, that's the power of the ABT.
It's something that, I mean, it is something real. And I think, I don't know, sometimes I think people are inherently skeptical of anything when you say you sort of have, it's like the magic elixir, but this is to me. And I've read every book probably ever on screenwriting and story, you name it, for the last 25 years. And I call this actually a gateway drug, because what it does is it boils all these centuries of wisdom down into the ABT, but it's all baked in the cake. It's all in there. If you want to take Campbell and show how that's ABT, or Aristotle and show how that's ABT, or Hegel and show how that, it's all there. And then once you start, especially for my colleagues who haven't read every book, once they read this 100 pages or whatever of the narrative gem, and you start name dropping like the hero's journey, and all of a sudden I think they're going to get curious and they're going to start digging deeper. That's why I call it a gateway drug, because then they're going to want to, well, what is this hero's journey thing all about? Which I love, because then I get to talk about that, till people's eyes glaze over. But I'll tell you what, that was my challenge heretofore, use a lawyer word, was I teach lawyers story. And I would try to talk to them about Robert McKee and Joseph Campbell. And I love talking about that. And it may be mildly interesting for my audience, but they left saying, what the hell was going on in there? Because it's not easy to grasp in an hour talk. The ABT gives them that thing that they can hold on to and understand immediately.
Well, I'm like you. I am a story goon in that I could talk with you all day long. And this is fascinating, but we're running out of time. Therefore, where can people learn more about you?
So my website, which would be dougpassonlaw.com. And of course, the book is on Amazon right now. It's in Kindle form only, but the hard copy is coming out, I think, in probably just a few weeks. I'm on all the usual places in social media as well under Doug Passan Law.
Well, Doug, thanks for being here. And folks, that book is The Narrative Gem for Law, Introducing the ABT Framework for Persuasive Advocacy.
Let me say, Park, I appreciate you so much. If it wasn't for you and this podcast that you've been doing so long, I would not have learned about the ABT. I wouldn't be sitting here right now. So I just want to say thank you, and thanks for having me on for a second time. That's really cool. I appreciate it.
Oh, man, I appreciate that. And the funny thing, you have this affinity for The Simpsons. I know Randy has the affinity for South Park. And that is kind of the birth of the ABT and how we've been presenting it ever since. So I love that cross-pollination of the two longest-running animated TV series ever.
I love South Park.
And they both they both have a legacy to the ABTs. Thank you all for listening to this edition of the Business of Story. If I can be of service to you, come on over to businessofstory.com. Know that I've got my ABTs of Selling online course. In just 18 minutes through 3 quick videos by me, I am going to show you how you can apply the ABT in all your sales and marketing work. And that's another use even for law firms. So not only can you use how to use the ABT from Doug in your legal proceedings, you can also use the ABT in the selling of your the selling of your law firm and get super focused on what you do differently and therefore better than your competition, because we all know that attorneys and law firms are a dime a dozen. So if you're going to stand out, you have to stand for something, and you can use the ABT to figure out what that is. I dare you. Get the partners in the room, surround them, teach them the ABT, ask them to write an ABT for the brand of your law firm. You are going to come up with a gazillion different narratives, and your job then is to find that singular narrative that really makes you stand out. And of course, if I can help you with that, just give me a shout over at mark@businessofstory.com. Until next week, when we will have another amazing story artist right here for you, like Doug, remember that the most potent story you'll ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks so much for listening.